Hello, my name is Isha Sarah Snow, and I am the founder and executive director of the NeuroHomes Foundation and NeuroHomes Communities. In March 2026, I spent 5 minutes on Facebook with the search prompt Autistic and Homeless. I found these publicly visible posts. They were not curated in any way. This is what came back after 5 minutes of searching on Facebook. The peer-reviewed research shows that autistic adults are represented in homeless populations at rates 8 to 12 times higher than in the general population. The first systematic study to screen an entire homeless outreach caseload found that 12.3% of long-term homeless individuals showed autistic traits consistent with diagnostic criteria compared to a general population autism prevalence of 1 to 2.8%. A subsequent study found that 18.5% of homeless service users scored above the clinical threshold for autism. Nationally, almost 50% of people experiencing homelessness live with some type of disability at a rate 2.5 times higher than in the general population. What follows in this slideshow is the human face to these numbers. The first section begins with autistic adults who are homeless or who are on the immediate edge of it, written in their own words. Matthew Quinn posted to the Adult Autism Community Group. He is on the autism spectrum and terrified as he is homeless. He wrote, "I have nothing else to lose and figured it wouldn't hurt to reach out." This is the predictable downstream outcome of a system that was never designed to find or serve this population. The research calls it structural exclusion, while Matthew Quinn calls it having nothing left to lose. I have to live in a basic, generic homeless shelter with nobody around who understands autism until I die. Can't even get SSDI because the system is broken. Aaron Nagy was undiagnosed until adulthood. This matters because without a diagnosis, there is no access to the disability services, housing vouchers, or supported employment programs that require documented clinical classification. The CDC estimates 1 in 36 Americans is autistic. National research documents that autistic adults face unemployment or underemployment at rates approaching 85%. Every year, approximately 120,000 autistic youth exit high school, while state developmental disability systems add an average of only 8,200 new adults to residential services annually, across all adults with autism and IDD combined. The gap between need and provision is structural, documented, and widening. Aaron Nagy is living inside it. Ash Kashmiri, who is autistic and had a sprained ankle, was turned away from both homeless shelters in Lancaster and expected to sleep outside. Research by Stone, Cameron, and Dowling, published in Autism in 2023, documents precisely why this pattern recurs. Autistic adults experiencing homelessness frequently prefer rough sleeping to shelter environments that aggravate sensory processing difficulties and social anxiety. They are more likely to appear in hidden homelessness statistics and less likely to be counted or served by mainstream systems. The shelter door closed on Ash Kashmiri. The research tells us how many others never try to open it in the first place. Aubrey Vaughn is an autistic adult with CPTSD, depression, and anxiety facing a housing deadline with limited income and rising costs. The executive function demands of a housing search, the paperwork, phone calls, bureaucratic navigation, and sustained follow-through are structurally harder for autistic adults. not because of incapacity, but because those demands are designed around a neurotypical baseline that completely excludes them. This is not a unique case. It's actually a predictable outcome. Victoria Price has 2 cats. The shelter system says to leave them. She says they're everything to me. So she's outside without food, without options. She has autism, depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and no system is equipped to reach that. Qualitative research consistently documents this pattern where autistic adults exit the shelter system or never enter it because it cannot accommodate who they are. They disappear then into hidden homelessness. They don't get counted, and because they're not counted, the system doesn't respond to the need. 19 years old, with autism, ADHD, and anemia. The family is disintegrating, fired without notice and no transportation with no support network, and both parents are disabled. In 2023, 1.3 million Americans with autism and IDD lived with family caregivers age 60 or older. Another 1.9 million lived with caregivers aged 41 to 59. The majority will outlive their caregivers. When those family structures collapse, and when parents get sick, when households break apart, there is no institutional alternative. Bowie is 19, and that cliff arrived early. This post was 1 hour old when it was captured. Jason Carter's mother kicked him out. He has 2 options now: move back to Washington State or be homeless. He ends with 4 words that we can all relate to. I truly am alone. 54 people responded within the hour. The community showed up where the housing system did not. And this is the consistent pattern in all of the literature. Strong informal care compensates for structural withdrawal, producing resilience without security. Resilience without security is not an acceptable outcome. I was homeless because I wasn't good at taking care of myself. I wasn't good at applying for housing, and I was too scared to do almost anything. I soon became a man who cried as he walked to his tent. He found no housing or stability. Then he writes, I want to tell you this story gets better. I want to tell you I'm okay. I'm not okay. This story doesn't get better. Rhiannon came through the Irish homeless system as an autistic ADHD person. She encountered dozens of people in homelessness she is convinced were also neurodivergent, undiagnosed, unsupported, having fallen through structural gaps that were never designed to catch them. This is not an American problem, it's a systemic problem in every housing and support infrastructure built without neurodivergent people in mind. The caregiving cliff is not only a future risk, it is the present condition of thousands of families right now. What follows is what it looks like when the family structure substituting for institutional support collapses and there is nothing underneath it. Jamie's son Howie is 27, level 3 autism. He fled an abusive housing placement. She's contacted every relevant agency and encountered roadblock after roadblock. Howie has been denied SSDI and is in the appeals process. His income is $298 in food stamps and plasma sales. She writes, we are not asking for charity, we are asking for connections and guidance. That is how exhausted this family is. Not even asking for a solution anymore, just a door that will open. This single mother cannot work because her 3-year-old autistic son is repeatedly removed from daycare settings that cannot accommodate his needs. She is days from a homeless shelter, and her family has told her they will be angry about it without offering her any alternative. This is what happens at the intersection of inadequate early childhood support, inaccessible childcare, and the absence of any housing safety net designed for families with autistic children. It is 4:53 in the morning. This mother is homeless with her 8-year-old autistic son. She has no support network, and she writes, "As a mother, I have failed, and it's not even my fault, but I've failed him." She's not failed him. The system has failed them both. When autistic adults and their families end up in crisis, that outcome is feedback about institutional design. It's not individual defect. A single mother of 3 boys, 2 of them autistic, is living in a Seattle tent encampment. Her ex-husband left the state. She has no family nearby. She's trying to find a way out with 2 autistic children and no pathway designed for her situation. The Hurd family is in a homeless shelter in Helena, Montana. Their son Aaron is autistic. The noise and unpredictability of shelter life are deeply difficult for him. Predictability, sensory manageability, and routine are not preferences for many autistic individuals. They are preconditions for stability. The shelter system provides none of them. The research has documented this, and these families are living it. This parent is living in their car. Their son has been offered an assessment for a program that could genuinely help him. The parent is afraid to attend because disclosing their housing situation might cost them their son. This is the punitive logic of conditional support, where you can access help but risk losing everything. It ensures the people who need support most are least likely to seek it. A father and his nonverbal, severely autistic son are being evicted this weekend because the son's nighttime behaviors disturb other tenants. This is what happens when the only available housing is standard market rate accommodation, never designed to include autistic residents. The autism itself becomes grounds for eviction. There is nowhere else to go. This parent works full-time and was told at a shelter that their 15-year-old autistic son would be separated from them by age. Separating a 15-year-old autistic adolescent from his primary caregiver in a crisis setting is not an acceptable outcome. They walked away because the system offered them no solution or other option. A mother and a nonverbal 5-year-old autistic daughter with a lost job, $325 between them, and the street. One paycheck. This is what housing precarity looks like at the intersection of poverty, disability, and structural absence of support. A disabled mother with 2 autistic children in a car accident ended up with no transportation and homeless. The immediate need was met by a donation, but a charitable crisis response and a GoFundMe is not a functional housing system. It's evidence of the absence of one. Just one sentence. Me and my child are about to be homeless in April. Any shelters out there that will take in me and my 4-year-old autistic child? She doesn't know if any shelter will take them, and she's asking strangers on Facebook because the infrastructure she needs does not exist. The individual posts we have seen are not isolated incidents. They are the visible surface of a documented structural failure. What follows is testimony of caregivers, advocates, and workers who have attempted to navigate the system and found it insufficient, inaccessible, or completely absent. Here, Joan is describing Massachusetts, one of the most developed disability service infrastructures in the country. And even there, they have long wait lists, no DDS housing supports, no case management, and no day programming. A voucher that grants access to a housing market that still can't sustain neurodivergent adults without wraparound services that are separately absent. If this is the baseline in Massachusetts, what does that mean for regions with far less? Only 7% of autistic adults access supported non-family housing. 7%. The other 93% are living with aging parents in inappropriate settings or without stable housing at all. These waitlists don't stretch years, they stretch decades. Resnick and Galloway's 2025 analysis confirms that the structural gap between the number of autistic adults aging into adulthood each year and the number of new residential service slots created annually is not closing, it widens every year. Kathleen knows 3 families personally who are essentially homeless, all involving severely autistic adults. She describes one mother asking how to abandon her 16-year-old son so he could access services, because in many states the only path to residential placement runs through the manufactured crisis of relinquishing care. She writes, "They just let families rot away at home." This is a documented consequence of waitlist infrastructure and provider shortages in state developmental disability systems. It is policy in practice. Kimberly spent a day trying to find help for Shannon, 29 years old, autistic, abandoned by his grandfather in rural Alabama with no food and no transportation. She called every service in Dothan. No available shelter, more resources for addiction than for developmental disability. And he needed help that day, not a wait list. The system had nothing. A homeless autistic man Deanna had known died of hypothermia in Hollister. He preferred rough sleeping to shelter environments. Stone, Cameron, and Dowling document this pattern in the peer-reviewed literature. Autistic adults who choose rough sleeping over inaccessible shelter systems are systematically uncounted and systematically underserved. He died outside, which is a policy outcome. What will happen to her when her parents are gone? I don't want her to be placed into a large, impersonal group home. I want her to live in a place where she is safe, known, respected, and supported. Not a warehouse, not an institution, not a system, a home. This father has Parkinson's disease. He is watching his own health decline and cannot escape the question of what happens to his autistic daughter when he's gone. This is the caregiving cliff made personal. In 2023, 1.3 million Americans with autism and IDD were already living with caregivers aged 60 or older. The majority will outlive them. There is no institutional alternative waiting when that moment comes, for most of them in most places. This father started building the alternative himself, and he's not alone in that. But we shouldn't have to be. Sasha has befriended a young homeless autistic man who has never had access to therapy, resources, or a stable support network. He cannot hold a job. His community avoids him because they do not understand him. Sasha names it directly. Autism isn't the problem, neglect is. The way we ignore, abandon, and misunderstand autistic people absolutely is. The system is not designed for him, but it's working exactly as it was designed. One of the most consistent findings across the peer-reviewed literature and the social media evidence is this: even when emergency shelter exists, it does not work for autistic people. The noise, unpredictability, sensory overload, loss of all routine and control, these are not just minor discomforts. For many autistic individuals, they are crisis conditions, and the research documents the result. Autistic adults leave the shelter system or never enter it and disappear from the count entirely. Emergency accommodation needs to be safe for autistic people, not merely physically safe, sensorially safe, predictable, manageable. When it isn't, the shelter is not a solution. It's a different category of harm, one the system does not register because it does not count the people who leave it, and it doesn't count the trauma that the system inflicts. Emma describes housing authorities placing autistic adults in HMOs, shared houses with communal kitchens and bathrooms, full of noise, smells, and unpredictability, and then being surprised when those placements fail. Staff certify their competence by saying, "We've done that course," but they don't have lived experience. So the placements fail. The cycle continues. This is predictable outcomes of responding to neurodivergent housing needs with neurotypical housing infrastructure and a training certificate. I spoke about sensory overload, about why, as an autistic person, I cannot safely access homeless shelters. The noise, the lights, the chaos, the lack of control. I spoke about this not as a complaint, but as a barrier that policies continue to ignore. Afterward, a government representative handed me his own used earplugs. He said, "I hope this helps you get further in life." She was testifying in a government research setting about structural inaccessibility. He handed her a personal object and told her to cope better. This is what it looks like when the system interprets structural failure as individual defect. Policy problems converted into coping issues. Dignity replaced with charity. Tasha names the mechanism precisely. When someone responds to a structural failure with a personal object, it shifts the responsibility back onto the person suffering. Accommodation is not a hand-me-down solution. Accessibility is not something you earn by tolerating harm better. If we want to address housing instability for autistic adults, we have to stop asking disabled people to adapt to environments that hurt them and start building systems that don't. This person has been masking for 44 years. When they communicate well, it is because they rehearsed it, know the topic, or are comfortable in that specific moment. I can relate to that a lot. The system sees someone who communicates well and then concludes they don't need our help. This person was denied disability multiple times, was previously homeless, temporary housed until spring, and then they had nowhere to go. This is the diagnostic and housing gap in a nutshell. There's no diagnosis, so there's no services, and so there's no housing, and so you don't get counted. Everything we've seen so far has been entirely grounded in what the research has already documented. Now let's be very specific and precise about what this evidence is saying. Autistic adults are represented in homeless populations at rates 8 to 12 times higher than the general population. 12.3 to 18.5% of homeless individuals show autistic traits consistent with diagnostic criteria. 1 to 2.8% of the general population is autistic. ADHD prevalence in homeless populations ranges from 24 to 65%, compared to approximately 5% in the general population. Almost 50% of people experiencing homelessness live with some type of disability at a rate 2.5 times higher than the general population. Autism-specific research estimates up to 50% elevated individual risk of homelessness for autistic adults. Waitlists for residential services stretch 5 to 10 years in many states. Only 7% of autistic adults access supported, non-family housing. This is what the other 93% in screenshots have looked like. Tasha Tuesday asked the question the data demands every policymaker answer. Who takes care of them when they become adults and you're no longer there to do it? Right now, for most autistic adults in most places, the honest answer is no one with the infrastructure to do it well. The informal care networks that currently fill that gap with the neighbors, churches, mutual aid, and community members who post on Facebook asking strangers for help are keeping these people alive, but they're not permanent. They're not scalable, and they can't substitute indefinitely for stable, purpose-built housing. This map shows existing neuro-inclusive housing communities across the country. Look at those huge gaps. Look at rural America and the Pacific Northwest. These models do exist, but the geographic reach doesn't. The communities carrying the highest unmet need are the ones most absent from this map. Not a group home is building towards the same gap, with private homes, shared support, practical help with transportation, paperwork, daily life organization, and community connection for autistic adults who are mostly independent but cannot sustain stability without some infrastructure underneath them. This is what the research calls community-based care. This is what works, and it's what's missing at scale in most of the country. The Washington Autism Alliance is documenting the same failure at the policy level, with critical gaps in healthcare and home health systems for autistic and IDD adults, leading to dangerous behavioral crises without adequate support. While the advocacy has been active, the investment has not kept pace. We currently see a shortage of safe housing with abuse in group homes and residential facilities, with staff shortages and high turnover rates. Waitlists stretch years, and respite care is absent for many families. Day programs exclude individuals with behavioral needs, and funding is being cut. This is a simultaneous failure across every layer of the support infrastructure. The foundation of it, stable, safe, sensorially accessible, dignifying, and respectful housing, is what must be built first. The research is clear, the data is consistent, and the human evidence is right here, found in 5 minutes on a public platform without looking for the worst cases. America doesn't have a homeless problem, it has an empathy problem, and honestly, it hates disabled people. Every post in this presentation is one person, one family, one moment of crisis that a functioning system should have prevented. Matthew Quinn, terrified and homeless, posting to strangers because he has nothing else to lose. The mother at 4:53 in the morning, wondering what to tell her son about Christmas. The father with Parkinson's, unable to sleep, wondering what happens to his daughter when he's gone. The man found dead of hypothermia in Hollister. The research tells us these are not outliers. These are the statistically predictable outcome of a housing system that was never designed for this population and has never been rebuilt to include them. That is what needs to change, and that is what NeuroHomes Communities is now building.